This is
There it
technically
is.
the second episode of this Redacted Culture podcast. And today I have as a guest Jared, who I will not call Jason.
Very good.
Jared of Orion Training Group. So thank you for being one of the guinea pigs of this experience. The
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting you this weekend. You came down to Phoenix, and we got into the conversation. We got into conversation as we do,
Mm.
and we had to talk about gun culture. So, um, you're with Orion Training Group. What's the introduction spiel?
The introduction spiel. Okay, so me personally, I'm in law enforcement. I run a training group called Orion Training Group, as Forrest said. And long story short, what we do is we offer training to law enforcement, military, and civilian clients. We focus largely on open enrollment. And for anybody that's listening that doesn't know what that means, essentially we post a course at a location and say, whoever wants to come to this, pay the fee and show up. And that is somewhat unique in the way that we do things for civilians because we offer CQB, land nav, long range shooting, things that typically have been kind of gate kept, if you want to use that buzzword, from people that don't have a certain credential or a certain pedigree. And the reason we do that is our belief in the Second Amendment and that it encompasses a lot more than just, a hunting rifle on the mantle or whatever. So that's actually how we met, right? We were working with a group of civilians, and your friend of a friend showed up over there, and a really fortuitous meeting. So if you're interested in Orion Training Group, look at our website, oriontraininggroup.com. Check out our Instagram, Orion at training. I'm sorry, at Orion underscore training underscore group. And that's really the two best ways to get in touch with us. And if you're interested in those kinds of trainings, again, we're not going to gatekeep it as long as you can pass a background check. We're not going to accept applications from the cartel, and we have had them. But if you are a responsible American citizen, that is our only vetting factor there. So that's pretty much the background spiel on OTG.
Nice. Well, we'll get into that one. For those of you who are tuning in, you know that this is like the second episode. So this production is actually self-funded. So if you want to support the channel, you can head over to redactedllc.com. There you'll find our merch page, and you'll find all the other secret goodies. If you've been looking through that, I know some of you have figured it out. Some of you have started to decipher the code for Cabin in the Woods. So we'll talk to you, or if you want to support the channel, that's the best way to do it. That keeps the lights on at home. That keeps the fire, and that carries the fire to the next generation. So it looks like we have out the gate something to start with, and that is this idea of gatekeeping. Do you want to talk
Mm.
about gatekeeping first, or like the state of the culture? Because I think gatekeeping as a buzzword, I don't, that's not that it's necessarily inherently divisive, but we talk about, like, I've heard gatekeeping my entire life, and it seems like half the time it's people being excluded from something they should otherwise be in. Like, you can't have, it's like the FUD version of it, you can't have that because it's military and law enforcement only. And then the other half that I hear this phrase gatekeeping come up is it's resentful people unhappy with the fact that they're not immediately welcomed into some kind of private circle. Like, if I create a group, like not a group or whatever, it's so vague, that's veterans only. In fact, it's 375 Ranger Bat veterans only, right? And then somebody who was a Green Beret, or whatever, says, "Oh, I want to be part of this group." Like, the gatekeeping process is you got to be a Ranger Bat guy. But so,
Yeah.
like, so that it's
Well, I
like,
guess like any good philosophical conversation, we have to set definitions and boundaries, right?
yes.
Otherwise, we'll go down the rabbit hole. So I would say that when I say gatekeeping, what I mean is keeping something away from someone for your own purposes, and not because they shouldn't have it, right? When And I literally just had this conversation with someone on Instagram. They posted a rhetorical question, tagged me in it. It was a snippet of our YouTube video, and it said, at Orion Training Group, should this really be on YouTube? And my reply was, rhetorical questions are a waste of my time. And they said, well, I don't understand. Bad guys could watch this. And I said, okay, who's a bad guy? And we went through this, I asked questions and kind of get where they're going. And ultimately what he said, quote, was, you are teaching a fantasy camp. People don't really need this. It should be kept for law enforcement and military. And that's what I mean when I say gatekeeping. It's not that people are really going to do anything bad with it, or that we're just teaching the next generation of militia violent extremists. It's that people feel scared and upset that what they view as something is secret, which is not secret, could now be out in the world. How to walk through a doorway is black magic, and you shouldn't teach it to anybody unless they're a cop or the military. To me, I see that as gatekeeping. I think that there are, and you and I had this conversation in Phoenix, there are types of gatekeeping that make sense. For example, we have our members club. You can only come to members club training if you're a member. That's gatekeeping, but not in the sense of I'm only going to train members in that club if they're cops, right? There's a distinction there in the why behind them being kept out.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Like we have to have some measure of exclusion. Like we have to have some measure of it. In the sense of like, I imagine as an instructor, it probably doesn't keep you up at night all the time, but you've certainly had to consider what would you do if somebody were to take your course, pass the background check, and then years later have a mental breakdown and do something abhorrent. Like
Mm-hmm.
I know, and in like if you want to call it a gatekeeping scenario, like it's not, even if you're not held legally responsible, I think you would feel something about that.
Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. One of my, not to say rebuttals, but when people bring that question of, well, what would you do if someone used the things that you're teaching that normally are kept for cops, and they used it for evil? And my reply is, okay, you have a guy that's a USPSA, rest in peace, USPSA Grandmaster or whatever, and they have a mental breakdown and they go shoot up a school or whatever it is, and they got some crazy split times when they're blasting away at these unarmed people. It made them a better mass shooter because they're really good at target competitive shooting. Do we hold USPSA responsible? Do we hold anyone that's trained that person responsible for them being so good, so quick with a gun? Um, I would think probably not. That doesn't mean those people aren't going to feel guilty. They're not going to say,
Yeah.
"Oh man, I was involved in that guy being so good at what he does, and then he used it for evil." You can never really know somebody or vet somebody at their character or their soul is at, right? What is the content of this person? All you can do is look at surface factors like, are they an armed are they a felon? Can they be armed? Are they any associations with things like the cartel? Yeah, and people laugh when I say that. We have been solicited by people south of the border, people in China, people in Africa that do not have our interest at heart. And so we only train American citizens, and we do look into their background. So that in and of itself, I think, is more than a lot of people are doing for things that are just as dangerous, such as being super proficient at shooting your pistol with .08 splits, and reloading in the blink of an eye. How is that any less dangerous than someone knowing a little bit of CQB? So I think when we look at it in that perspective, it kind of really diffuses the whole argument. We're already doing so much that is dangerous for a civilian to know. Why are we suddenly stopping the buck at, oh, they shouldn't know CQB?
Yeah, CQB seems to be. I thought you said it well. As like the black magic of walking through a door. Is that
Mm-hmm.
like CQB is such an interesting subject because to those who are completely unfamiliar with how it works, it looks like it holds this air of mystery, right? And then to those who, but then people get introduced to it, whether through work or personal, whatever. They find their way into taking either a course or being taught because they're in the military and police, and like their first experience of it, once they get the basics down, is like their ego usually just skyrockets. Like, oh, I know how to CQB, and there's only one
Yep.
way.
I
It's
was
like,
guilty of that too.
yeah, like I think in many ways all of us have. Like I think maybe some people worse than others, but then that their skill level and their doesn't match their ego on it, and then eventually that ego gets smacked back down,
Mm-hmm.
and then they get to really appreciate like the fine details, because you're like, oh wow, it's as simple as um, not lingering in a doorway and clearing your corners. Okay.
There it is. That's what we've built our whole program on. Is there are fundamental principles in every doctrine, and like you saw when you were there at the class, you have your background as a ranger. I have mine as a SWAT guy. We have people there from other SOF, people there from the Air Force, God bless them. And they all have different views on it. But what was the fundamental driving principles? Don't point your eyes at something your gun's not pointing at, right? You want to be scanning with your muzzle. You want to be hitting corners first, getting out of doorways fast. You need your buddies to be backing you up. So if you're going to the left, they're going to the right. Do as much work as you can without being exposed when you can do that, which leads us to things like threshold assessments when it makes sense, leads us to going dynamically. And we could do a whole podcast about being dynamic, going dynamically when it makes sense. And that's really it. That's all it comes down to. You can get into the minutia of footwork and weapon manipulation and all those things, but that comes down to individual preference. So like you said, it's like the more you learn about it, the more you realize, okay, it's a simple science. There's a million ways to do it. They all come down to the same factors. And people get really wrapped around the axle about it when it's nothing crazy. Kind of like when you first learn how to draw a pistol really well and fast and present it on target and all those things. It's a bunch of little bitty pieces, and all those fundamentals are going to apply across any pistol you shoot or any rifle you shoot. But when you watch someone who draws and shoots in 0.75 for the first time at a target 5 meters away or 7 meters away, you're like, oh my God, that dude's a wizard. That dude's
Yeah.
insane. But once you learn how to do it, you go, oh wow, okay, it's not that crazy. It just takes practice. And that's kind of my point, is that CQB is analogous to any other firearms related skill set. Why do we have this weird schism of, okay, well, you can be an absolute death machine with a weapon, but you can't know how to walk around in a building with it? I don't understand that.
Yeah, it's not. I don't get it either, in the sense of like it. Why people shouldn't? I think maybe the question that I think the giving the devil its due, trying to steel man a bit of the argument. I think the question that would be raised by people outside of outside of gun culture,
Right.
would say, well, you don't need that, right? It's very simple. It's this, it's this
Yeah.
need, like like if you look at the history of like liberalism,
Mm-hmm.
this idea like that there's a certain train of thought that traveled through the Enlightenment that went something like this. The concept of property, people are people, why should people have property, right? It's sort of this like extremely, it's not even not navel gazing, but this extremely like far out look, like what is the point of property and private property? And that idea was sort of founded in like, well, it's an individual, and then there's like the fruits of your labor, and there's these like, well, a person should have the fruits of his labor. So if I grow the crops, I get to keep the crops. Okay, that makes sense. But then we started, oh no, we lost you. Technical difficulties happen. So we're back. Let's get back on the train of thought. The train of thought, or the thing that came from the Enlightenment with like liberalism, started to address this issue with like need versus productivity. And what the Enlightenment philosophers essentially came to argue with or conclude is that no one can really determine what another person's need is. Like if we were to distribute according to people's needs, unfortunately, it can only produce some form of tyranny or or not even problematic. It can only produce some sort of tyranny or some issues if people are allowed, like governments are allowed to determine what the needs of their civilians are, or their citizens are. And so like this is where you get a little bit of John Locke, you get a little bit of the American founding fathers, and the primary concern was that whenever a government or a body of people is allowed to determine what another person or person's needs are, and we're not talking necessarily just Maslow's hierarchy of needs, But whenever we allow someone to have the authority over need, then you kind of create a tyrannical issue.
Yes.
You create the inroads to tyranny, because I can say, well, you don't need that. And so, like, this, I think you can find it in not Gladstone, but On Liberty by it's the famous one. I have it on here. I have it on my shelf somewhere, but on Liberty is kind of the famous one by I can't remember his
I know
name.
what you're talking about. I can't remember the name either.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
But so, like, we were talking about CQB, we were talking about need, and it's like, well, you don't need to. Well, it's like, yeah, I don't.
yeah. Thomas Paine touches on it a little bit as well, and I'm sure you've
Yep.
read Common Sense and The Rights of Man and all that. He talks about, we don't need another father. Like a king refers to his subjects as children, and
Mm-hmm.
he's not even a good person to himself. How should
Mm-hmm.
he know what I need when he lives 5,000 miles away? Um, that is the same. I view it the same way with legislators here. How are you going to tell me what I need when you are also a person? You don't
Yeah.
have some sort of holy authority to say, oh, you don't need to know that. Okay, well, you know, who the bleep are you? Because I know we're not cursing. So, who are you to tell me what I do and don't need to know how to do, especially when it's not objectively evil? And that brings us back to the fundamentals of the Second Amendment. Owning a firearm for the express purpose of preserving liberty. Well, let's take that to its furthest possible logical conclusion. What does that actually mean? It means using violence when it's necessary to preserve your freedom. And they knew that. They did that themselves. The founding fathers did that themselves. So our country is built on this philosophy or this idea that you have the right to certain things and that violence protects that right. And so how can we draw a line on who gets to know what as it relates to those topics? Um, my personal opinions obviously heavily influence on that, but you should be able to buy a belt fed at Walmart. It's not an inherently evil device. To say that knowing CQB is wholly bad because it should only be left for the people that have sworn an oath and served the country is somehow saying that those are all perfectly good people with no bad intentions, and anyone that wants to learn it outside of that scope of law enforcement or the military must be a bad person or have bad intentions. I don't think that there's that line doesn't really exist, and by saying Group A civilians doesn't need it, Group B cops needs it, puts this puts them on unequal standing, maybe morally, I guess would be the right way to say that. And I don't feel that that's correct, and that's what our company does. When I say we try to level the playing field, it should be such that you are an American citizen, you have the right to these things as
Okay.
best as we can currently.
Yeah. So, if I understand this correctly, then, like, as you're presenting it, one, that you have an issue with the idea of one group of people going to another group of people and saying what they can and cannot do, like, whether it's legislatures or whatever. Like, there's a certain issue of, like, oh, I have some sort of random tyranny by legislature or whatever to say, oh, you can't have access to this information.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. I want to keep steel manning the argument, though, and, like, really addressing this. I want to keep steel manning this issue with gatekeeping, because I
Mm-hmm.
think another example of what it might look like is, all right, one, you can't determine my needs. Fair. So, like, you shouldn't be able to tell me what I can and cannot learn based on this kind of stuff. The second part, though, where I think it gets a little bit more murky, then, is you have two people. One of them has a background experience, professional capability of doing the thing, and then somebody who doesn't. Right, somebody who might be an enthusiast, or might be, which doesn't need to be, like, insulting, but, like, they're not a professional in the sense that, like, they don't wake up, put on their boots, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and pick up a rifle and kick down a door. They don't have the sanction from the government. And what happens then is that the person who has the experience and the background and the sanction ends up getting into an argument with the person who doesn't. And then that person will say, well, you're gatekeeping,
Mm-hmm.
because you're not letting me learn the thing that I need to learn to do it. And then the attitude that they're given is, but the attitude that they're presenting is, the person who has the knowledge and the experience might be withholding it because they're frustrated by the presentation of the accuser of gatekeeping.
I think a key part of that is context, right? I think that's
Mm-hmm.
what you're getting at is as a professional end user, which you'll hear us say in our classes a lot. If I'm training a SWAT team, they're going to get the same CQB principles, but I'm going to frame it in such a way that they use it for their context. So when we train a group of people that are not professionals, as you put it, and that is the right word for it, we have to frame that context for them. And it is often, hey guys, you may never use this. And if you do, it will probably be the absolute worst day of your life. And you need to understand that if you don't spend a ton of time often training on it, you will not be as proficient as someone that does it for a living. So we try to frame it in context. And I think that's what a lot of people that get offended that are professionals, they don't see that. They see Instagram marketing. They see, a bunch of people that in their minds have no right to be doing those things, and they don't understand that the people should be, and we try to teach that way, learning within context. So, I'd love to hear it just from you too. What do you think the context is? Just take for example, like the guys we trained with. You have 5 dudes not doing this as a profession. They really want to understand small unit tactics within the scope of being reasonable men, what is the context in which they would end up having to use that ever?
So justifying a skill set based on potential futures.
hmm Which is what
Okay.
a lot of people try to do. That's the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
argument that a lot of people try to make is, well, when are you ever going to need that? When are you actually ever going to use that? And so then, what's the answer?
I think there's some very real you, the evaluation of this kind of decision is oftentimes made on the legitimacy of the story, right?
hmm
Like, okay, um if you justify your actions on the pending apocalypse, the quality of your justification is not necessarily determined by the skill sets that you present, but the likelihood and legitimacy of the pending apocalypse that you present, which is why apocalyptism, this kind of, preparing for the end of days, bunker building kind of stuff, doesn't
Mm,
it doesn't stick well. It's
right.
very, it's sugar. It's like lots of energy, lots of motivation, but it burns out really quickly. I don't think it has like the foundation needed. Whereas culture building is much more long form, long grain. Like, I do get, because of my appearances on like Tim Pool's show and some other places, I do get asked what like a bug out bag question of, of course my
hmm
background, it fits the thing where I've worked in the past, but it's like the biggest bug out bag flex is a community of people that you can trust. 3 or 4 friends, 5 or 6 friends, 1 or 2 friends, your wife, your husband, the people that they're like, it's not that it's not going to be easy, but it's that I can wake up and say, hey bud, I need your help. I do need your help. And then like, and because if you survive the apocalypse, you have to be able to produce something that comes after. Like, right? Like,
Yes.
so
That's a big point with a lot of these people, and that we could side conversation on the whole, like, oh,
completely.
I love anarchy. I want everything to burn. Okay, cool, until you die of dysentery. You know.
Yeah, like anarchism is like full on. My experience with full on anarchism is it's no different than like other utopian ideas that, like, if we just get rid of the bad thing over there, then everything will be perfect in my world. It's weird how anarchism
Narrow.
is narrow and authoritarian. It's
Yes,
like,
it's the same thing as you'll own nothing and be happy, right? It's it's the same thing.
yeah,
Um,
you'll own nothing and die of dysentery. I'm not complete. Like, it's not that it doesn't like. It's not that it doesn't have its points. It's just that I think that anarchism or like libertarianism struggles for the same reasons that utopian ideologies struggle. In that, when it comes to brass tacks and reality, it's really still focused on making something over there change versus what I'm doing with myself.
Bingo.
So is there a scenario where a bunch of, I've heard the term civilians being referred to as citizens lately.
I
And
prefer
I
that.
do like that. Is it like we are citizens, not subjects? I do think that's an important distinction. Um, is there a scenario where they might need to use said CQB experience and skills? Well, there is, regardless of the likelihood. It's like the battlefield accuracy question. What it is? Do you need to be able? It's you don't need it until you do, right? It's really one of those things. Like it's not even about need at its foundation, but even that case is like, so you're saying that the likelihood of a person, let's look at the amount of soldiers who went to the amount of people who went to war in, like, the global war on terror, is that, like, for a 20-year war, our KIA number was actually pretty small
Yes.
comparatively to Vietnam, Korea, World War II. Like, it was a 20-year war, but it was a 20-year conflict, and then, right, but you know but so in all reality, if you were in the American military, your likelihood of getting into combat was actually pretty small, and your likelihood of, with the exception of, it's very much run by the Pareto distribution, but a very small amount of people did most of the fighting all the time. So most people didn't have it, but when they did, when they encountered indirect fire and an IED, and their base was attacked, and or whatever happened, that, like, they could have said, well, I don't need to know how to use a tourniquet because I'm a cook. There's a medic somewhere that'll do it. That's not how that scenario would have played out. It's
Mm.
like, well, now you need it and you don't have it. Well,
It's concealed carry. Same thing.
exactly, right? So there's that issue. There's the other one, is like, I do think that you can say with a certain amount of confidence now that, at least in America, violence is on the rise, and it's not like it's not violence, like,
Yeah.
it's not, I mean, some of it's political violence. We had the guy in, was it North Dakota, who basically admitted to running over a person because he said that he ran over, like, a 17-year-old kid, because, and killed him with a car and drove away, because he said that the kid was a radical right-wing extremist. All right, that's an anecdote. Another one would be, like, you look at the crime in major cities. That's an anecdote. Not It's not an anecdote. It's a collection of data points. And what is the scenario where the citizens would need to use CQB? They live in a home. There are buildings around, and they're, like,
Something bad happens.
and something bad happens, right?
Oh my
It,
God! It's almost
you
like
know,
that could happen to any one of us, like that.
new. I think we as individuals are morally responsible to not engage in the fantasy of wanting a catastrophe to happen so that we can exercise our skill set.
Well said.
I think we need to that I think, but I don't think that that's a government decision. That's a personal decision. Like, you have to,
Well, it's like
like,
you said, you can't fix what's over there until you fix what's in here. So, what is the
mm-hmm.
why behind training? And that's another way that we vet our students. We say, hey, what do you, in 350 words or less, what do you think you're going to get from this training, and how are you going to use it? Why do you want to be
Interesting.
here? And they have to answer that. If they do not answer that portion, I will not continue with the check. And I've turned a lot of people away when they say something stupid like, I want to know what I'm capable of. I want to be able to test myself in in an apocalypse situation or whatever else. But the people who say, I want to be part of a team, I want to understand what it takes to work in the team in this environment, I want to make myself better, I want to be better for my family, that is a motivation to understand these concepts, not I want to prove how much of a man I am, right? You and I have been in CQB settings opposed. If you could choose every day to go roll those dice, would you do it?
Oh, heck no. I mean,
It's the worst day of your
no,
life,
like,
right?
it's not the
Um,
worst day of my life. Like, I didn't.
if you goes wrong is what I'm saying. You know, you're fighting
It
someone at 7 feet with
Yeah,
guns. So
I don't admire being in that position. It's not admire. It's that like
it's not a desirable spot to be for any length
no,
of
you
time. And people that have
yeah.
never done it will put it on that pedestal because they're like, oh my gosh, I love SEAL Team CBS. I want to learn CQB. That's not the person I'm looking for. The person I'm
Yeah.
looking for is a reasonable individual that, like you said, observes the change in the world and says, there's some things I really don't understand that I might need to know. And again, CQB is this much of it. What about farming,
Mhm.
water purification? What about you said networking, just being able to have a buddy that you can say, hey man, I need some help. And when all the infrastructure is gone, that is more valuable than gold to have someone you can rely on. Well, that's
Yeah.
what CQB is built on. We just talked about it before. If you go left, your buddy goes right. Well, that dude is protecting your back. And those concepts and ideas extend far beyond room clearing. And that's what we're really trying to do is say, hey, you don't want to do this alone. It sucks with five people. You probably don't even have five friends. You should want to network. And we give that little speech at the end of all of our classes. Hey, tell your friends what you learned from this, not room clearing wise, but how good was it to work with people? Did you meet anyone like minded? Is there some commonality here? What was the positive gain from this? Can you keep training this stuff at home? And like we've talked about, that changes culture. It's not that we're going around trying to teach everyone black magic of CQB. We're trying to shift culture.
Yeah. I don't think if you want to use fancy words, I don't think CQB is something that should be understood as like tactical Gnosticism or like
Ha, well
there's
said.
some secret magic out there or like ooh, it's tactical Gnosticism, like Gnosticism being like
Mm-hmm.
secret knowledge, right? It's
Correct.
there's no like you can't do the mantra, you have to do the work. So
Correct.
you brought up culture and you brought up, you know, and this is kind of a conversation about gun culture and you brought up being useful in your society. I think is not the right way, but like it reminded me of something that I heard Mike Glover say, which was like the greatest threat you can be is independent.
Yes.
Heavy paraphrase, right?
That's so true, though. The greatest threat to an organized system that hates you is not having to rely on it.
Not having to rely on it. So what that when we talk about that idea, like and you started bringing up culture, like how we change culture. What is your opinion of this thing we call gun culture and how have you seen it changed?
Oh
And
boy.
could you even define it?
Yeah. So, what is your opinion of gun culture? How have I seen it change, and can you even define it? So, I'm going to start with the definition. Like we talked about in philosophical conversation, we got to have that. So, I would say that gun culture is a multifaceted monster. You have, like we talked about, the flood lore people. You have the guy in the fishing vest that shoots USPSA, and to him, it's a sport. He sees his 1911 like someone that loves basketball would see a basketball. It's a way to enjoy and relax, and he doesn't often think beyond it as a tool for anything else. That's a big part of gun culture. That's a lot of the gun culture that I saw growing up. Um, the competitive shooting and the magazines with the old dudes in the fishing hats, shooting pistols, and that's a big side of it. And that's we came from that, right? Those are the people that spawned us, and now we have a different gun culture. And what is our gun culture, and who is the our in that statement? People in this generation, millennial and back into the God bless them, the Zoomers, they are seeing the shift in society. And as you and I have had in conversations before this, the gun culture that they're growing up in is influenced by people like Garand Thumb, Lucas, video games. We talked about Modern Warfare before we started the podcast. There's a sort of association with guns now as what they are intended for, which is extreme violence. It's what they were designed around. The Gatling gun, when it was invented, was not a hunting implement. It was made to kill a lot of people really fast. And all of our weapons are now built on those sort of semi-automatic systems. The gun culture of the modern day and how it shifted. What change have I seen? Well, let me frame it for you. Okay, so homeschooled first through fifth, a bunch of small private schools after that, then went to LSU, big college. Um, so my education started off in the home. We got, our first knife at 8. Started hunting with our dads at 4. Grew up fieldcraft, learning how to build fires, build shelters, how to track people and animals. I learned turn and burn drills. We had radios. We learned firearm safety was a big fundamental. We got our first rifle, first pistol at 13, first rifle at I think 15 or 16, and 22 caliber revolver, 22 caliber rifle. We had been hunting with shotguns before that, so I was brought up in such a way that firearms and firearm safety is ingrained in me as table manners, right? You don't chew with your mouth open. You don't point a gun at anything you're not willing to destroy, stuff like that. Well, then I get into college and I start getting into the Magpul videos, the art of the shotgun and the art of this and the art of that and all that kind of stuff, and seeing Haley and Costa do all the fancy mag flips and all the cool stuff. And my whole goal had been to be a SWAT guy the whole time, so I started to get involved in the tactical stuff and playing milsim paintball, and my whole world began to shift from I'm going to go hunt and do these things with firearms to I'm going to get into understanding the tactical side of things. Well, I think that what happened to me in college is happening to people at age 10. Look at kids' toys even. You can get a frag grenade and an MP5 with a screw off suppressor that has a real bolt catch on it for $10 at Walmart. I bought one for my nephew the other day. So that even kids' toys are now not a big orange shotgun. It's a full auto MP5 with a suppressor you can screw on and off of it, and a frag grenade that makes noises. So children's mindset even, and then you get into like 16, 17, 18-year-olds. I'm getting DMs from 19-year-old kids that are welders. They're like, "Hey, I got 10 grand. I want to buy nods. What do you think I should get?" And I'm like, "Well, what are you going to use them for? I just want to hear your thoughts." They're like, shooting at night, being effective at night. Half my time alive is spent at night. Why would I not want to be as capable at night as I am in the day? Here's my other gear, and they send me the picture of what they have, and they are far more squared away than I was on kit, even as a SWAT guy, because the culture has started them at. If I was at square one in college of okay, my first AR with a shitty center point scope and whatever else, to I've got this kid who's 19 that decided not to go to college and is making six figures, and he's bought everything better than what I had as an end user kicking those doors. We talked about being a professional earlier. So that's the shift I've seen in gun culture. It went from kind of like this fuddish sort of homestead. You need them to defend yourself, but also to hunt, and there's a responsibility that comes with it too. Now it's very much, I use this gun in Call of Duty. I want quad nods. The world is going to hell. I'm 19. I have this sort of doom and gloom thing going on. I want to have all the cool stuff, and then I want to also understand how to use it in a tactical way. It's kind of There's a lot of people turning their backs on competition. There's a lot of people that could give a crap about hunting, but they want an AR and body armor and night vision because they're now seeing it as a necessary thing, and it is cool. And that's sort of this weird hybrid that we're in now.
Do you
Um,
see? Yeah. Do you see that the do you see that the doom and gloom perspective of like the doom and gloom pessimism of looking at society writ large is a post hoc justification for having the things that they want to have?
yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people say, "Oh, it's doomed. Society's going to burn. I'm going to need all this stuff." And they probably would have bought it anyway because it was cool. But now there's this cultural association of everything's going to hell. I need to have all this kit. And
Yeah,
I'm not saying I disagree with that per se. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you were justified in having it anyway.
that's an important distinction. That you don't need the apocalypse to justify buying quad nods, dude. Like you don't
Exactly.
need to have the apocalypse. Is it? Do you have a washer and dryer in the house? If the answer is no, then maybe it's not the best decision
Yeah. Lucas
because
talks about that a lot. Get what is financially responsible for you because you do live in the real world,
you do live in
right?
the real world.
You do
Yeah.
live in the real world, and you see, I'm sure you're up and up in all these meme formats of it started with the Task Force Doomer. It's
Yep.
the Wojak who's smoking and he looks all fried and he's sad
Yep.
about everything. And there's a lot of people in that 17 to early 20s range that really believe and really buy into the idea that like they're not going to make it and everything is screwed, and they want to have all this stuff, not because they're malicious people or they're going to go do something to somebody, but because they view it as a way to start making themselves ready. And it's not in the same way as a prepper, because believe me, like when Y2K hit, we had 55-gallon drums of ammo and rice and beans, and we had the Faraday shielded stuff. And I mean, we were ready right in the year 2000. I remember it. I was 6.5, 7 years old, helping my dad pack ammo and rice and beans into stuff. And we had,
Funny.
backup radios and all kinds of things. Like we were ready, and then nothing happened. That is the kind
Hmm.
of FUD lore side of prepping. And now you have 17-year-olds that are worried about the same thing, but they're not doing that. They're doing what's more considered cool. So we have this
Sure.
weird blend of like real fear of bad things happening mixed with I've got to have the newest, coolest thing.
Hmm. Yeah, there is the gift of fear as it functions. I find in myself that fear is only good as a short term motivator.
Mm-hmm.
It's only good for bursts of energy, because
Agreed.
like it never it doesn't short term fear might get me to talk to my friends and say, hey dude, I'm not like, like we were in Minneapolis in 2020. That's where we lived at the time. And it's like, I remember when everything went down, a group of us coalesced around each other. We all knew each other. Well, sort of. But like for a very short while, we all got on board. We had a way to communicate. We built a way to communicate with each other. We all got, but right. But that ability to do that was not built on the expediency of the moment, but that I had known these people for a long time.
Mm.
And over a year later, by 2021, that group had basically, it not fractured as in like it broke apart into different sub factions, is it just sort of dissipated. The threat was gone. The immediacy of the threat was gone. And so when 2020 happened, when George Floyd died, and the riots began, the gun stores were empty. Now, most of us in our circle already had stuff because, like, that's what we did, whatever. Um, but now all these people are going out and they're buying body armor and trying to buy night vision, and people are using the people use the riots of 2020 as a justification to buy night vision, hands down. They're buying all this equipment, and then, but what happened was like 2020, by the end of 2020 into 2021, the crime continued and it continued and it continued and continued and it persisted. And then, up until the point where we left the city, we left Minneapolis because to some extent, because the city responded to what they considered to be a threat. Well, 150 buildings lit on fire is kind of threatening. And then its response was, oh my goodness, buy guns, and like just kind of let the culture go. And so whole swaths of the city are more or less an economic wasteland now. And it's just so
And what is
like,
what boils down out of that? Well, it was individual responses, is what I see.
yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
individuals said, "I'm going to buy a gun to be safe," when they hadn't thought of it before. 1,000 people had said, "Hey, we all have guns, and you're not going to come burn buildings down out here," and it presented an armed front, because certainly law enforcement wasn't doing a thing. Ask me how I know, because I was a cop at the time. There was a time when a riot was starting to form on a major highway in Baton Rouge, and we were like, "We're not going to let you block the road." So we went out there, we blocked the road ourselves. So we stood in the same place where we told them not to stand and formed a line. And so law enforcement response is reactionary. It's usually fairly pitiful compared to what needs to happen because they're fettered by public opinion. And I'm not saying that a mass mob of 1,000 people needs to go commit vigilante justice. That's not what I'm saying. But when you do present the threat of force to people that have been relatively unopposed, they'll flee. Why do you think people were able to burn 150 buildings in Minneapolis? Because no one was doing anything about it. But if individuals had said, "Hey, we're a group of people that do not appreciate wanton violence, and don't come over here," and they had the actual ability to carry out a defensive measure, probably less things would have gotten burned down. The problem is that
Yeah.
our society now relies entirely on the government to do those things. We call it a monopoly on violence, right? So if the government has a monopoly on violence, and if we go back to the needing things, the capability to even to back up those responses that they say they have, people are going to be left to suffer like they did in Minneapolis because in reality, no one's really coming to help out. You ended up having to leave the place that you call home because nobody whose job was supposed to be fixing those problems was actually fixing it. They would rather turn a blind eye and let it happen, and when it gets over with, and hopefully they can get reelected.
Yeah, so I think what it looked like in that area was like it's there's actually not a criticism against the people going and buying the guns. Like no, it's not like
No,
I
not at
don't want to
all.
even I don't even want to turn this into like a
Not at
gentle
all.
backhand, right? It's not even a gentle backhand or some garbage. It's not like, oh, now you're here to the party. No, 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 that wasn't the issue. Like the challenge with the situation being, um, you people reacted to the immediacy of the threat, but once the immediacy of the threat was gone, the reaction faded, and now the crime is still there, and the violence and the carjackings and the shootings and all this other kind of stuff, right? And so like why I where this references to gun culture is that like a lot of gun culture is changing, which is why I wanted to have this conversation with you
Mm-hmm.
to see what you've seen in it change from immediacy and reactionaryism to like homesteading
Mm.
or
Yes.
community building. Like let's cut to the chase. We talk a lot about the need for gun culture and building culture. Where have you seen culture built, and
Mm.
where have you and what has that been like?
So
Me,
that's really good question, and is really the meat of the conversation. So, what have I seen change and where?
mm-hmm,
In the 2 years that OTG has been a thing, we have had some students take 9 classes. This is an individual paying their own way. And I asked the guy, like, okay, why are you spending so much money on this? And his answer was, I have seen a difference. I've seen a cultural difference in the way that things are being handled by training companies. So that's one. I've seen a shift in training company culture, and I'm going to continue that thought. He said, but I have seen a change in the culture of people around me after I've taken these classes. They've said, well, what do you know about that subject? Can you teach me? So there are people that are timid about even going to a class about CQB or about long range shooting, or there's even classes on homesteading now. But they want the knowledge. They either don't want to pay for it or they're scared to go take it because they don't want to get put on a list. So there's the let's say there's the 1 out of 100 people that takes a class. There's like probably 50 out of 100 people that want to go take the class or at least are curious about the knowledge. So there's a big shift in people's priorities when they spend money on training. I had one guy message, and this is not an exaggeration. He said, "Hey, I really want to come take your CQB class. I don't have any previous training, but I've taken 19 performance carbine classes." Uh, and I was like, well, none of those apply. You don't have to take any sort of carbine class to learn CQB movements. We will teach you weapon handling for CQB application. Just come to the class. He was trying to see if he could get out of the intro day, but 19 performance carbine classes has nothing to do with CQB. And so there's a shift, and this was an older gentleman. So there's a shift in I'm going to take 19 classes on how to shoot a carbine to I'm going to take 9 classes all on different topics, and none of them actually have to do with shooting. It's
mm-hmm,
it's all sorts of other things. So where have I seen shifts not only among individual students and what they're telling me about their group, I have probably come across 30 or 40 groups, and I'm not going to use the M word and say that they're militias because that's not really what they are. It's really guys that get together twice a month. They have common radio channels. They have maps of their areas. They have a plan for treating water. They grow gardens. Their wives get together and work on things. They have meetings at each other's houses and barbecue, and their kids play together. And they're literally just a community that is avid about things that include stuff that you would say is gun culture, shooting. But then there's the other side of it. There's a general mindset about being prepared and being ready to do things that the average soft guy is not going to do. And that's another shift I've seen in gun culture. There's a sort of a trending away from like, oh, you're a casual, you just like to shoot a couple times. You go to the flat range and you shoot somewhere at an indoor range where you can't even shoot rapid fire and you can't do emergency reloads, you're a casual. You might have a gun, but you don't really have a gun. I go to CQB classes and I do small unit tactics and I know land nav. So there's become this disparity in gun culture between it used to be, yeah, I'm a gun nut. I shoot at the range once a week. To now, like that dude is a poor. He's got the two ARs and the pistol. He's not as cool as the guy with the quad nods that knows how to navigate at night. And neither one of these is an end user or professional. They're regular folks. They might one dude might be a bus driver and the other dude might be a some kind of software tech. Their jobs have nothing to do with this stuff, but they put themselves into this social or cultural standing based on their proficiency at things that are tertiary to guns. And I see that a lot with our students. Everybody, just like when you walk into a bar, right? You immediately say, "Okay, look left, look right. Who could I kill here?" Right? If it pops off, who's the guy that I'm going to have to worry about? Maybe you don't do that. I do that. I also don't go to bars very often. So the individuals in classes get to a class and everyone's looking at everyone's gear and they're saying, okay, what does that guy have? Oh shit, that guy has an Ingall. Oh, look at that guy. He has a D-ball. What a poor. They're sizing each other up in ways that would not have happened 10 years ago based on gear, based on the way they move. Hey, oh, you've been to the Haley course? Well, I went to the CAGWorks course. There's different associations and camps forming between classes and instructors, which is really weird to me. Like, oh, I'm a Haley guy, I'm a Mike Glover guy, I'm a whatever X-Ray Alpha guy or whatever. People form these schisms between two people that have training companies and they don't owe that person anything other than the money they paid for a course. So there's a
Yep.
cultural identity coming to ascribing yourself as a loyal. It's like a Japanese movie, the old Japanese karate movies. Like, I am of the so and so school. I will prove to you I'm better. It's very much like kendo now with guns. Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's weird. So
I,
and
I've,
then
I've I've seen it. I've heard it and seen it compared to that in more ways than one. From more than like, very much so. Like the levels, the belts, the versions. Like, oh
dude, I
yeah,
hate it. You know how many times I've
like,
been asked, "Do you guys have a patch? Do you have a level 1, a level 2 patch?" And I tell
yep.
people I specifically do not have a patch for this reason. I do not
Or
want you to come to class because you can show people a patch.
another one would be like, yeah, no, because we want to have like a feeling of it can be hard to define progression, right? Like
Certainly.
unless you're doing a purely metrics based practice, which would be basically competition, because the military is not that metrics based.
Oh
Afghanistan
no, you're
showed
kidding.
Afghanistan showed us that we're extremely bad at setting grand narrative objectives. We're like, we're here because the reason,
hmm
but whatever, like even being whatever. Yeah, I'll get into that later. But
That's another podcast.
it's there's just it's great, fine. So you brought up a thing. You said gun culture. There's you two parallels, kind of like the old ways was the FUD ways, and then the
Mhm.
new ways is all like the old culture was very the fuddy kind of thing. We like that term, and then
hmm
but then the new culture is struggling with divisiveness,
hmm
like brand loyalty over
God.
whatever else, right? And I've thought of like gun culture as oftentimes kind of like, although this is timely appropriate, like the Vikings, right? You got all these little tribes and they all stab each other and kill each other, but then like every once in a while a Hillary Clinton comes into the world and they're like, unite, and then they all go
Yes.
after that. And then as soon as there's no like evil dictator on the board, or like the rule has been defeated, they all go back to like fighting against each other.
Yes. It's
And it's
it's again
hilarious.
it's Japan and feudalism, right? Like, I am the
Yep.
most elite. I have the red armor. Oh well, I'm the most elite. I have the coolest blue armor. And then
Yep.
let's fight. And they don't unite until the British show up with cannons, and they're like, oh crap,
Yep.
gunpowder. So I think
Whoops.
you're 100% correct. It's all about making groups, and I'm better. And this is just human nature ultimately. So gun culture is a reflection of just how people are, but now it's in a new microcosm of I have a gun and so do you. Now, which way are we going to be cooler than each other? It's no different
Yeah.
than like we were just joking about. You have a PS4, I have a PS5. Obviously, I'm cooler.
Oh yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
But the problem is that it's involving our fundamental rights as people in a
It's
political spectrum.
yeah, it's like it's fundamentally hierarchical, but we
Mm-hmm.
don't really have a very clear hierarchy.
Because there's no governing body, which is what a lot of people want. How do you regulate and govern a culture? Well, you really don't. It's whoever's yelling the loudest. And I found this out because when I was a cop, I absolutely hated. Well, I say when I was a cop, when I was a full time cop, I discovered Lucas T-Rex Arms page, and at first thought it was cool. Like, this is
Mm-hmm.
neat. Look at all the cool stuff he's doing. I can't shoot that fast. And then he started doing dumb stuff, like running around cars and shooting and talking about things like that. And I didn't have the maturity and didn't process nuance the way that I do now. The dude sells holsters like they're going out of style, right?
Yeah.
That's what he's doing. He projects a cool image. I can shoot really fast or run around cars and stuff. And the 19, 17, 18-year-old that are like, I want to get into this. Oh my God, he's my age, around my age. He shoots really fast. He's really cool. He said, I'm cool. I don't have to be a cop. I'm going to buy this holster. That's what it's about. He's created a culture around his brand. What I saw as a cop was he thinks he's better than me and he's a turd. And I built a whole t shirt business making fun of him. Now, the shirts didn't make fun of him, but a lot of my marketing appealed to cops and military guys. This is like 5 years ago, making fun of civilians that were doing stuff they had no reason to be doing. And the page ended up getting deleted for literally for cyberbullying, is what enough of his followers reported this for. So his little camp of minions attacked my little camp of minions. We ended up losing. Fast forward, 4 or 5 years, he reaches out to me on this new page, Orion Training Group, and he says, "Hey, I love what you guys are doing." And this is unsolicited. We had not talked via DMs. I've never reached out to him or anything, or commented on his page or anything. He reaches out to me and says, "People are asking about CQB and night vision and stuff. We don't teach that. We teach basic firearm stuff. I wanted to know if I could send them to you." And I was one very humbled and flattered by that. But I was like, "Hey man, yeah, that'd be great. Do you remember me? Do you know who I am?" He was like, "No, should I?" And I kind of said, "Hey, look, I spent way too much of my free time as a grown man trying to bring you down, and ultimately it didn't work, and it got me kicked off of IG." And he said, "Yeah, I don't really have time for that kind of thing. I don't even remember you, and I'm still happy to support you. Obviously, you've grown past that." And I was like, "Yeah, man, cool." So the divisiveness in gun culture, and I've tried so hard to make this happen, um, doesn't get anybody anywhere. I'm not saying be so inclusive that you don't have boundaries, but
Mm-hmm.
Lucas and I might disagree about a few things here and there, and we don't have to get into that. But I don't hate the dude, and I'm not trying to bring him down. I'm trying to do my own thing, and by being loud about what I believe is right and good, and he's loud about what he believes is right and good, we're doing more good together for the community than me saying this guy's a turd, but I'm also not making my own thing. Right? Selling a T-shirt doesn't benefit in and of itself as a cultural change unless there's a good culture associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've built this culture, which is why I'm on this podcast with you and why you wanted to talk about it. And a lot of that comes from the maturity of realizing like tearing other people apart, whether I like or don't like them or agree with them or disagree with them, invariably does less good than just making my own thing and explaining why I believe that it's good. And if the gun culture community, and I don't even know if community is the right word, would just do that, um, I think we'd be a lot better off. But people like controversy. People like to sound like they're better than someone else. So they spend all their time tearing other people apart.
Yeah, we have our trolls. We have our people who build their entire industry, their entire participation in the culture on sowing division, and like they exist. Like there are people out there,
It's big people too
and
that you wouldn't think. Like you see drama at all levels from these huge companies with hundreds of
yeah,
thousands of followers. Not some
and
faceless troll account. It's like, what are you doing, dude?
yeah, it's not exactly right. And then there also is this issue of like it comes back to the hierarchy of like in an honor culture, because gun culture kind of reflects elements. I mean, the military, it admires and it reflects elements of what you'd consider honor culture versus dignity culture. Read the book
Mm-hmm.
Why Honor Matters by Summers. That's a good example. He starts to divide. He like draws the difference between dignity culture and honor culture because they're very different things. Um, so we get it. Like there has to be some sort of like I'm challenging you, And your story with Lucas is kind of quite interesting because yeah, I think Lucas is in a position where he for a young guy bears an immense amount of responsibility to gun culture because he's been such a leading leading in some ways, participating in others, contribution to the good and the bad.
Certainly.
And how like I think one I've seen in myself is that whenever I build a certain amount of my identity or thinking on resentment towards an individual, the traits are like maybe it's like I'm looking down on them for being this, right? We're human, we do things. But like it seems like whenever I at some this is maybe unique. Whenever I it's not that I make judgments of people, but it's whenever I look at a person and I start building, well, I am not like them. At least I'm not like them kind of thinking.
Hmm.
Give it 5 years and I will be doing exactly what that person is doing. And it might, like, or give it time. It's interesting how, when it's not that when we judge, lest ye be judged. It's sort of like time has a cruelty to it where when I am acting immorally and judging people, not judging, when I'm acting immorally and making myself feel good by looking at the failures and downfall of others, I am setting a timer because it will come for me,
I think
right?
they call that karma in Eastern
Yeah,
philosophies.
I guess so. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I
no,
think,
100%.
so yeah, so there is the divisiveness that can come out. What do you think? What do you think when if an individual is listening to this and capable of recognizing in their self that they have participated in the divisiveness? What would you give advice for them? As in, like, not go beat yourself up and self-flagellate, but like,
I was going to say that actually.
oh, cool! I gotta go find my cat of nine tails. I gotta
Right.
refresh the little knobs in it. And all the
Oh.
British people are like, haha, knobs.
I was also that way. I just internalized it. Um, I think that the best advice would be is self-reflection, like you said. If you determine that much of your joy or your dopamine release daily comes from bringing other people down, best advice I could give would be immediately stop doing that and then see how much better you feel when you try to bring people up. So the amount of patience I have gained from running an open source page and answering 100 DMs from people that don't have context, right? As a professional end user, someone who's been opposed and done this kind of stuff at a high op tempo and with all the strictness of law enforcement and things, you get somebody that comes and asks you a question that if they'd never done it, they would know the answer to. And it's a silly question for for anyone that's done it. And then you frame it as this person is coming to me not because I'm being put on a pedestal or because I'm better than them, but because I have made myself available to help bring other people up. And now I get to
Mm-hmm.
help this person and give them context. Again, not like, oh, I'm so cool. I'm an angel. I'm amazing. But I get the opportunity to help somebody. You're going to feel a lot better than like, I can't wait to tell that dude how much of a piece of scum he is because he didn't sign on the dotted line. He didn't swear an oath. Because most people that have signed on a dotted line and sworn an oath have regrets. There's parts of their service that they're grateful for and that they love, and there's things I would not trade for the world, and it's put me in the place that I am. But I'm never going to look at somebody and say, "Oh, you didn't serve. Well, you must be a scumbag." Um, Especially if you want to know the secret stuff that I know. And I was that guy towards Lucas for years. Oh, I'm this and you're that and blah. And then it bit me in the butt. And now he's coming to me and helping me with business and saying, I like what you're doing. I want to help send people to you because you have a service that they need. And that came from me trying to be helpful. So the same person I was interacting with very negatively, he actually blocked me at one point before I got banned because I was posting sandwich recipes unsolicited in
Oh
his
no, we're doing
comments.
it again.
Are we?
No.
I hear you. You hear me?
So as it turns out, not all recording platforms are created equal. We had another difficulty, but let's get right back into the conversation. We were on so Lucas and you had your Lucas T Rex, you and I, you had this past, but now you're coming back and you're like not necessarily working together, but like,
Nah. Yeah, he's not crapping on me. I'm not crapping on him. We're just doing our own thing and being loud about what we like and what we think things should be, and that's probably a better way gun culture should behave.
yep, we're building. It's easier to tear down than it is to build up. And then building itself. So what are some we were talking about it this what does building culture look like to you? Like, what is a good thing that you've seen, and that what is like that what is building culture? I want to come back to this topic.
hmm
And like
Um,
and how can we do it? How can we do it better?
so culture, and I don't have Webster's in front of me, but culture is generally like a unique set of customs that people engage in to
Mhm.
feel related, right? There's different ethnicities and countries and races that have different cultures at all different levels. It often comes from proximity, comes from
Mhm.
commonalities. So when you say building a culture, that means we're coming up with things that give us a ritual or a tradition that builds commonality. And that's just off the cuff. I might be wrong about some of those definitions, but in my head, that's what pops up first thing. And for anyone watching this, we didn't script this stuff. We're just having a conversation. So I think that in as it relates to this gun culture, we have to find common ground. And there was a lot of podcasting and angry Instagram living talking about how there can't be unity. It was the word that was used because people are people and people don't unite, which is really funny because our country is built on that idea
Mhm.
that people of different ways and beliefs can unite on common ground. And namely the belief in private property, the sanctity of human life, pursuit of liberty, happiness, and all that crap, right? And that old piece of paper.
Mhm.
So I think the gun culture can do the same thing. We have to find common ground. We have to find some definitions and some boundaries for um, talking about what is the proper use. Um, what is the real meaning behind what we're doing. A lot of that's philosophical, so you're going to have differences. There'll be people that want anarchy, that want to be part of the club because anarchy alone doesn't actually work, because anarchy doesn't work. But there'll be people that want to be a part of gun culture that most people in gun culture won't want to be there. So we have to have some sort of boundaries, some definitions. Me personally, I don't want Antifa to be part of gun culture 2.0, but I'm sure that they are. They have night vision, they're training, they have plate carriers. Um, I don't see communists as fitting into the freedom game, right? But that's part of being American. There's people that are sitting on the city council in major cities that are communists in the sense that they are part of the Communist Party of America, and they were
Yep.
elected. So it's insane to me. So does gun culture 2.0 have room for those people? How do we build a better gun culture, as you said? Well, anytime there's a culture, it is influenced by the society it's within, the people within it, their religious beliefs, their a-religious beliefs. So how do you build any culture? It's by being loud. It's by saying what you believe proudly. And if people find commonality in it, they join you. That's it.
Mhm.
And if enough people are saying things loudly that sound similar, it begins to coalesce. I don't think it's done overnight. I think it's done over the course of years and years and years. You and I keep using this 7 year mark. Okay, 2015, gun culture did not look like it does now. It was anodized red parts. It was speed Glocks. It was, all kinds of stuff that people now are saying that's lame. You're a FUD. Why do you have red anodized parts in your gun? You should have Fieldcraft. You should have this. You should have that. And why is that? Because all these big companies are saying it, all these influencers are saying it, and people that are not influencers that are following trends are finding truth and commonality in it, and they're ascribing, to that tribe, that tradition, saying, "Okay, that is the truth. That is what I believe. I just didn't know how to say it. Now I'm part of this group." So gun culture, as it improves, we have to kind of tear down the boundaries between companies. We've established that companies help create culture in this market, namely training companies and gear companies. We've talked about Mike Glover, Lucas, X-Ray Alpha, John Lovell with the Warrior Poet Society. us, there are people that are saying 90% of things are the same, but they get hung up on that little 10% of I'm better than you because that is what
Hmm.
stops it from growing. So how do we make ego, because ego is a huge part of gun culture. We already went over how people compare their gear and their training regimen and this and that. How do we take ego out and make gun culture about coming together despite small differences? Again, big differences like I'm a communist. I don't want you in gun culture. But if your difference is I'm a classic liberal, I'm a libertarian, I'm a conservative, we all believe in the right to bear arms for freedom, liberty, and things like that. I think that makes sense. So trying to get
Hmm.
around political when it makes sense, political lines, religious lines. Okay, you're an atheist. I don't care. You have the right, and those things are protected. There are people that would say there's this whole Christian nationalism thing that's happening now. Um, the memes are hilarious. I get a kick out of a lot of the memes. But the reality of actually saying, like, oh, we're a Christian nation and you should only be allowed to do things that are Christian is no different than the Taliban, right? But we're a Muslim nation and we should only be able to do things that are Muslim, uh, or that fall into the Islamic tenets. To me, that's terrifying, right? So there are people that have extreme beliefs that want to be part of gun culture and are a part of gun culture that we have to be really careful about. But again, how do we be careful about them when there's no organization? If you
Yeah.
organize, how does the government treat that?
Yeah. How do you have a hierarchy in a group in a culture that sort of admires
Yeah,
and despises hierarchy at the same time? And
exactly.
how do you set it? Like we the one thing that we have in common is we will not have a king, but I am in charge.
Yes, it's the
Right?
Family Guy episode where they overthrow the government, and the first thing they realize is that they need a system of rules.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's
Yep.
that's literally it. With
Hmm.
culture, I think, is separate from government and
Hmm.
rules. They influence each other, but having a culture does not necessarily mean that you have to have a set of rules or a governing body or whatever else. But it does it gives, as you said on our sidebar conversation, people of influence have a great responsibility.
Mm.
So we may not have a government in a gun culture, but there is a responsibility from people that are helping create it to do certain
Hmm.
things. And I think part of that, and I want to see it so badly, is people actually just getting along because the stuff they're arguing about is stupid. It's stupid. It's small
Yeah.
things. Why are
Like
we arguing
imagine
about this?
Yeah, like imagine sitting down at the table in 2022 and making an argument about 9 millimeter versus 45, and imagining that you're going to be thought as like an intelligent person. Like
Exactly.
I culture has moved on, man. Like that
Barrel
conversation is
length.
that was barrel length had its time. My
Oh my
I think
god.
I was not a part of that one. I think my favorite one is ultra slick lightweight plate carriers are so 2020. It's like, oh no.
Load bearing.
Um,
I must have 50,000 mags.
yeah,
So
like you got a
eh,
sustainment fight. It's like, yeah, okay, it's funny, man. I love it. I think, yeah, I love that we do this stuff. That we like throw a fit over.
mhm.
You have 7 magazines, not 19. Like
Right.
I also
And
have a spinal cord.
meanwhile, you like don't know who your representatives are, and you don't know the bills that are in Congress, and you're not taking
Mm-hmm.
active steps
Mm-hmm.
to change anything. So again, it's human
Yeah.
nature. What's the easy route? Tear someone else down, make me feel better. What's the hard route? Be productive, be loud, understanding your own beliefs, and having an ability to articulate. That's another thing the internet has reminded me. There's some really cool, smart people out there. The only reason you and I are hanging out right now virtually is because of a connection made through Instagram. I went to these people's place to train. You're friends with them, and now this cool conversation's happening. So the internet's great in that regard, but there's
Mm-hmm.
also a bunch of really stupid people on it, and they don't even know that they're
Yeah.
stupid. That's part of being stupid. They don't even know. So they get a
The and
platform and a voice too.
the antidote is to do stuff like you and I are doing now. Like sit down with your friends and have a conversation about the thing that you want to talk
That's
about
it.
that you don't know. And it's like what Jordan Peterson said has brought it up, and I was like, oh gosh, it's been on my mind a lot lately
You
because
have to
it's
think.
been what keeps what keeps my like what keeps me going is this like I would rather have it that I tried my best and stumbled along the way than never took the path.
Hmm.
I would rather have it like you and I have this conversation. I'm not going to be as articulate as I could possibly be, but I'm going to give it my best. And I'm not going to be, I could have done more. I could have spent more money on studio lighting and blah 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 blah. But it's like, if that stopped us from having this conversation, it doesn't mean that you bullwhip your way through knowing that you're being ignorant. But if that stopped us from having these conversations, we'd never get anywhere. So yeah, it's just humility and courage are tied much closer than we think. It's like humility and courage are so interlinked, because humility, without courage, you won't act, but without humility, your action won't be good. I guess you could make
Yeah.
that one.
Well, in
But
some ways, it takes courage to be humble when someone's saying, "Hey, I'm better than you about so and so," and you let it ride, and you say, "You know what, man?
mhm.
You might be. No worries. I'm not that worried about it. We got bigger things." That
Yeah.
in the public sphere takes a lot.
And what do
There's
I
a
have to
couple.
offer?
Right. What am I actually bringing to the table? There's a couple really big
Hmm.
companies that got kind of annoyed at OTG and had some big, well watched and shared live streams, and they were very upset that we were teaching civilians, and the things that, and even then, the things that we were teaching, they say doctrinally they didn't like. And these are guys that have been out for years and years, and they mostly do competitive shooting and stuff like that. And I'm not trying to cause drama by even talking about it, but we were never addressed. We were never tagged. No one sought us out to talk to us about it. They wanted to be loud and public about it because it gets attention. And that's ultimately the motivator is, ooh, I don't like what they're doing. Let's talk about it a few times. I didn't even know about it till people sent it to me and were like, what the heck is this? And I was like, I don't know. I'm not that worried about it. And I haven't given it much thought beyond why would they do that? Oh, it's because of all the drama going on in their industry and they're trying to get views and likes and things like that. So
Sure.
when you understand people's motivations, and like you said, the whole humility thing is much more difficult
Hmm.
than just making noise.
It's difficult it can be very difficult at times to determine whether or not someone's criticism of something you've produced is born out of authentic concern or
Right.
just like malicious resentment. It can be difficult, and I think that if I'm criticizing somebody like Tim Kennedy or GBRS Group or Lucas Botkin, am I capable of saying to myself that it is out of genuine concern, or is it out of envious resentment? And if I can't answer that question, I it's a sign that I should take a chill pill.
Yeah, it's
But
because you're probably being self-serving, right? Which we all are
yeah,
as human beings at some point, certainly.
kind of like back to the communism thing. Like, it's easier to criticize capitalism than build a successful business.
Damn, you need to put that on a t-shirt, man. That's good. Holy crap. Hang on, let me write
It,
that down on this napkin I'm eating bacon off of. Hang on.
well, bacon. So, unpopular opinion. I think prosciutto is better than bacon.
Oh, I agree, and my Sicilian side agrees as well.
Okay, cool. Now that we're both heretics, which side of the pyre do you want? What side of the American pyre do you want to stand on? Are you right or
Yeah,
left-handed?
we'll hold hands when we're burned at the stake.
Well, we might be being burned at the stake for multiple reasons then, but oh well.
Hey, man, I'm not. Wasn't I had to tell somebody this today? I wasn't brought here to judge. Um, I
But
had to
I'm good at
post.
it.
Yeah, dang straight. I had a post about it's the one that made it into another one of those gentlemen's lives today about the deadlifting and kit, which
Hmm.
if I'm sure you saw it,
I did.
it's supposed to be it's marketing, right? People go, what is that dude doing? Why is his ass out? Is he wearing night vision in his garage? What is he doing? And
Hmm.
the point is, I do like to lift in my gear once a month as a gut check, but it got people talking. In 4 hours, it had almost 10,000 views and 2,500
Nice.
shares. And what was the caption about? Changing culture. And in
Mm,
it, one of the things I said at the end is, hey, love your wife, stay true to your wife, quit watching pornography, be
yeah.
good to yourself. And somebody commented, "Can I love my husband, or is that against the rules?" And it's a man saying this, and I said, I'm not here to judge. That's not what this is about. I was just saying that
Mm,
you should be true to the people that you're here for. And he said, okay, cool. That's what I thought. Back to sticking my suppressor up my butt. Was his comment back after that? And I was like, why are you? Was I being trolled? Because I was trying to be genuine. I don't know if this
yeah.
person was actually gay or not, but um, it's funny
Yeah.
how the culture does that. It's like instead of reading it and saying, wow, this guy had really good intentions and it's well written, and I see what he's doing, they try to find the chink in the armor. Oh, well, what if I'm gay? Do you still think all those things? You
Yeah.
know, it's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
Crazy how that
I
goes, man.
yeah, it's we've criticized this thing called purity culture. Like and it was, whether it's used in like the 1990s Christian communities where it's like, but even that's a different version of it. There's another one that's like, I'm more X than you. I'm more Native
Hmm.
American than you. I'm more something than you. I'm more African American than you. I'm more Christian than you. I'm more 2A than you. I think
Right.
individuals should be able to buy nuclear weapons at Walmart. Like, okay, man. Like, it's
Right.
not yeah. When it goes awry, it's funny, but it does.
I
It can
agree.
be.
I
So
agree.
one of the motivations for this whole production is that everywhere I've been through this industry and this culture and this community, the thing that stands out is that we have really good conversations in private, and they're about subjects that are difficult to work through, and they're intellectual in nature. Do you agree with me on this statement? One of the differences between the old generation and the new generation of gun culture is the new generation is much more interested in the intellect.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't even
Yeah.
considered back in the day,
I
in
remember
my opinion.
I remember whether it was at certain times in Ranger Battalion or like just FUD gun culture was like deliberately anti-intellectual. I don't want none of that
Yes.
ivory tower bullshit. I don't want any of that super smart words thing, blah blah blah. Um oh, you're sounding too complicated. Like I know that there's a little bit of that. Um when it comes to the philosophy of violence, because gun culture, it cannot get away, it will never be able to get away from the fact that it is inherently involves some potentially the potentiality of violence. When you think about this thing that how do you define violence? How would you start with that one?
Mm. Anything that harms or causes damage, and that's very broad in general, but
So
it goes into
we're
the rest of my philosophy.
beyond physical, so you can psychological,
Oh yeah,
emotional,
oh yeah.
financial.
It could be
So
intangible, it could be spiritual.
okay. Okay, so violence. So then, how then do you separate? How do you distinguish who determines what the damage is? Is it determined by the victim or the actor?
I think anytime we put an input into something that is entropic, like our world is, we can't really guarantee what it actually does once it leaves our control. So
Mm-hmm.
I could intend to shoot someone in the leg. What the bullet does once it contacts the body is out of my hands, right?
Okay.
So I think the giver of the violence's intent is very important.
Okay.
Intent
So
will always be important,
all right.
but the violence is determined by a lot of factors, and a lot of it, especially if it's intangible, such as mental, emotional, spiritual, not physical. A lot of that is going to come back to the person that is receiving it, or the thing that is receiving it.
Yep.
Um,
Because the left receives criticism for saying words are violence or silence is violence, right? You're damned
mhm,
if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you speak, what you're speaking causes violence or harm. And
right.
if you don't say anything, if you don't affirm me, what you're doing is violence or harm.
I think that
And we even
that's a very slippery slope. And when I say that it's for example, mental violence, right? When how it affects your mental status. I could be upset and degrading to my wife a lot and never lay a hand on her. And some would say, well, you weren't violent. However, she has received damage and harm that is intangible. And my intent
mhm.
was to harm her by being mean and degrading and things. So violence in that sense is not physical. If we only say it's physical, then we really don't look at it very deeply. But to say that all silence is violence, or if you don't do the thing I like, you're being violent to me. That's part of a victim mentality that the left suffers from a lot, and some people on the right. This whole cancel culture thing. Um, we could get into that in a whole separate podcast, but yeah, I
Oh
would say
yeah.
that it's violence takes many forms, but we have to be careful about when we can use it to blame someone else.
Okay, so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to distinguish and define. We're trying to define violence to distinguish it from other types of interpersonal interactions,
Right.
right? So like I can talk to you. Yeah, and it brings up the question: is violence an on-off switch, or is it a continuum? Like,
Hmm.
because on one side you have two distinguished Englishmen having a debate, and on the other side you've got a barroom brawl. And like the usually the line by which it becomes a fight versus a debate is very, very hard to draw, except for when one guy throws the first punch. But
Right.
like, yeah,
Right.
okay, I'm goading you on. It's entrapment. We have issues. So,
And what was your intent? And that's why, and of course, this is me as being a cop, right? So as a cop, intent is huge. When does it become violent? When I intend for it to. Now, whether you react in kind or whether you feel it was violent is going to be, again, that's the other half of the equation. So if I came to you, Forrest, and I start saying all kind of mean and terrible things and talking bad about your wife or her appearance or whatever else, trying to elicit a response, my intent is to cause you harm and maybe even to cause you to be violent, right?
yep,
If you say, you know what, I don't care about that, I don't take it that way, I'm going to move on, whether you saw it as violence or not, now your next actions have a different intent. Um, so I think that that's a huge factor in it. When a cop shoots somebody and their intent was to stop harm from happening, well, they had to do a lot of violence to stop other violence. So I don't think
mm-hmm,
violence in and of itself is necessarily good or bad or evil. I think that it is about intent. And to try and define it too harshly with too austere of a line is limiting the reality of it. Because when we talk about it between people, there's a lot that goes on because we are the man who thinks about thinking. We it's either premeditated or it's not. You either meant to do this or you didn't. But violence has a lot of faces. When a lion eats a hyena or a lion eats a zebra, nobody is thinking that's morally wrong, but it's one of the most violent things you'll ever see. The zebra is
okay.
screaming and crying and doesn't want to be eaten and it's trying to get away, and the lion is chowing down. It's extremely violent. It's inherent in nature, but it's not
So,
bad.
so, so we're unable to. So two points from that I got. One was, violence is amoral. It itself is not the an act of violence itself is not enough information to determine whether or not the act itself was moral, and
Correct.
that we also cannot look purely to nature to get an answer, because
Correct.
nature also participates in violence. Okay.
And even in religion, most religions have a very violent core.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you and I are both believers. If we wanted to talk about Christianity, we could, but just look at the final act of before mankind is forgiven for sin. God allows, or in some ways of looking at it, kills his own son as a human sacrifice in a
Mm-hmm.
very, very violent way, very unpleasant, one of the most
Mm-hmm.
unpleasant ways to die at that time. So is violence evil or bad? Well, I mean, in my own belief, the way that I am saved from eternal damnation and the way I've become a better man is by the very violent death of another person on my behalf. So even in most
Yep.
religions, you can't say violence is bad because it's why we're all here. you
Yeah, I
know,
think it being like, if you're a Christian and you believe in the inerrancy of Scripture, and you believe that the Old and New Testament were the divine Word of God, and that you believe metaphysically that God is the author of that which is good, and therefore it is in the Euthyphro dilemma. It is good because He says so, not because He observed it as good. If you understand these things, then the book then the Old Testament will be very difficult. You can't to conclude that violence itself is a an
mm,
evil, because God commands His people to do violence on other people.
to commit
It
genocide against an entire race. You
Yeah,
know,
it's like genocide. Yeah, I think
the Canaanites. He said, don't even keep a goat or a piece of their cloak or their
yeah.
tents.
I'm just I want to be careful and not to apply modern terminology to a different era, because it's
That's
like
very fair. That's very fair.
chronological snobbery. But like, what we would say is that, like, God says go kill all the Canaanites, and you're like, well, what make who determines what's a Canaanite? He's like, kill.
Yeah.
goats.
Anyone
You know.
across this river, wipe them
Hmm.
out. Don't even keep their gold or things that would have benefited the people. Like, what's wrong with eating a goat that you took from the people you conquered?
Yeah,
God said, God said, kill the goat. You know.
you could
Whew.
make an argument that God commands the Israelites to attack and kill the Canaanites and not keep them as either slaves or people to assimilate and bolster their population, gain their economy as some form of sacrifice. I think that's a bit. I mean, you'd have to be extremely articulate in that argument because it's not like
Certainly.
you're going to use these people as a human sacrifice to me. Like okay, like all right, Dawkins, I got you. You're really whatever,
It's a
dude.
bit of a stretch. Yeah.
It's a bit. It's just like it's not that it's asking or reaching. It's groping for a premeditated moral conclusion.
Certainly.
That's
And I
so.
think my point is much smaller, just to say that even in most religious doctrines,
Mm-hmm.
what makes things right is a moral law coming from something bigger than us. It's handed down, right? There's an absolute morality in Christianity that comes from God. And within that
Mm-hmm.
morality, violence is not necessarily wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So even
Within
even
that,
in that scope, it's not
and
considered wrong.
and even in our legal system, and even in our kind of meta religious governing
Hmm.
body in the United States, we believe in some places that you have a right to self defense. In some places, I guess they don't, but
Huh.
yeah, right.
We'll stay away from the right to self defense and the whole pro life argument as well. That's a whole other podcast we could do.
Oh yeah, that would be a long standing. Well,
We
let's
wouldn't
get
solve
into
any issues.
we would solve zero issues. But let's address then this one as you're a training company, as you guys run training and you train people of different backgrounds and with different directions in life, and you include a vetting process, which I think is interesting that you require them to have like sort of a statement of intent, like why do you even want to take this class? I think that's a really interesting way to do it because you don't have any problem with courses. Like you're not running short on
We
students,
sell out,
right?
and we sell out 6 months in advance. I'm planning
You
stuff for March now because we don't have any availability left.
All right. So like and so I after taking your course, I can say you obviously have something going for you, right? Like one of the things that I appreciated of your class was you translate theory and practice back and forth really well. You don't you it's not that you're trying to sound smart. It's that like okay, here's the idea, here's the goal. And then you do a really good job of that. So like okay, fine. I also, enjoyed it. Then here's the like I don't want to. So you've done that well. You don't have an issue staffing courses, but you have a form of in previous line gatekeeping where the person has to like get past you
Hmm.
in order to get into your course, and your gatekeeping is simply like a statement of intent and background checks and so on and forth. And so that means that you're already making evaluations. And so then when you are teaching a course, what do you think of when you're thinking of like a continuum of force, escalation of force? We have words like awareness and situational awareness and escalation of force and de-escalation, and these words all sound fancy and they're tactical and they've got Kevlar in them and Molly and blah blah
Right,
blah. Right? They're
right,
like the intellectual version of it's tactical, man. But
right.
but what is your like? How do you think about and how what do you think the ideal use of force looks like, and how should people change their mindset when they're considering violence to not when they're considering doing violence, but like how do they think about violence?
When they're pondering it, yeah.
Yeah, like
Um,
there's a necessary element of premeditation to taking a course. Like, well, it could happen, therefore I want to be ready. But that's not the same thing as premeditating, planning that I'm going to go hurt you.
Correct,
Right.
100%. And that so first thing, just talking about the statement of intent, it's important for me. And again, that's my background as law enforcement. Every single time I had to write a police report, I have to talk about what I did and then why I did it. What was my intent behind each action? Um, most people when they get in a fist fight don't have to go write an essay about why it happened and every single punch they threw, but I did. So every time I put hands on someone, handcuffed them, every time I had to pull the trigger or observe a friend pull the trigger, you have to be really articulate. That's why I require this from people. I say, okay, I am intimately familiar with violence and also intimately familiar with the process of processing it and writing it down and being read my rights and having to talk about it on camera and on detail, um, because the government and society wants to make sure that the reason you did it was the right one. Well, me as a training, company, the onus is on me to make sure that you have intent that aligns with the goals of the company. And if you come to the training and you say, I want to go be the next mass shooter in your statement, obviously it doesn't align with what I believe, what our company believes, and also within acceptable limits of liability, right? As you said before, what if something, you have to think about this. What if something blows back on you, So there's this sort of a safety net there for me in that I have documentation from a person saying, hey, this is what and why for me to be at this training. But I want to know their mindset. I want to understand, how do they perceive the use of the material? Because again, intent to me is everything. Um, that bears a lot of responsibility, right? So what do I think of when I think of continuum of force? What do I think of when I'm dealing with people that don't have as much context? I guess I'll start with that. So we just trained with a law enforcement team, a SWAT team out in Indiana. We went to a DoD training facility. We spent 3 days there with them. Really easy to teach that in the sense that I have 100% of the same context as those guys. I've been in their boots for all those mission sets. I know their policies. I know the case law. I know the use of force. Really easy for me to say, hey, look, if this, and this happens, here's your next step. Violence is a part of that job inherently. When I'm teaching civilians that don't do those things as end users, as professionals, I have to be very articulate and very careful about talking about the real use of force. Every single class I've had, someone has shot a no shoot, and it is equal numbers of civilians and cops or military. So why do we have people shooting targets that are no shoots? And for the audience that's watching, if you don't know what that means, a shoot target is something that's a clear and present danger. If you don't immediately engage it, it's going to engage you. For example, someone holding a gun up, right? Self-defense, boom, instant reaction. A non-threat would be a target with his hands up. Doesn't mean the target is not in real life a person with their hands up. Doesn't mean they couldn't immediately try and draw a weapon and become a threat. You just have to deal with that person. But that person is in the moment at a paper target with its hand showing. It's not something you want a student to shoot because you're trying to ingrain immediate reactions based on input. So looking at the threat of force when we're teaching civilians, who don't have a policy governing them back at their agency. They don't have case law per se in the same way that the cops do. How do we give them context for the use of violence in a continuum? Well, that comes back to the whole like, why do you need CQB? I don't overdo that portion. I just tell them, hey man, real talk. If you were with your buddies and you had a real no crap reason to get into this room and you encountered someone with a gun pointed at you, do you think you're justified in shooting that person? Is your intent in that moment to save your own life and the life of your partner or your buddy? Well, yeah, man, of course, yeah, I could do that. Okay, cool. You go into that same room and there's a person there with their hands up, and then a friend or a family, they're not clearly presenting a weapon. Are you shooting that person or are you going to hold on them, zip tie them, question them, whatever it is? Oh man, I don't know. I never really thought about that. I always thought about my context for this would be, I'm shooting everything if it goes down like this. So a lot of civilians don't have the sort of scope and the practice and the real world application of not everybody is a bad guy. So we really have to focus a lot in our classes on if you ever had to actually do some sort of room clearing, it's probably your house and your family. So do you want to be shooting everything? No. And if it's not your house and your family, and we get back into that apocalypse kind of way of thinking of like, oh, it's all gone to hell, and now me and my buddies have to go raid the local Walmart. Again, there's probably other people in this context, in this scenario, that are also just trying to find food. Are you just killing everyone because? So it's not like we give people a rule sheet and a guidebook that says, hey, in CQB as a civilian in all these made up scenarios, here's what you must do, and here's a continuum of force, because it's largely made up. And it's the point is that we're trying to get people to be aware of all the things they don't know. And one of the things they come away with these classes is they don't know what use of force really looks like. They don't understand a real use of force continuum. And we often fall back on the self-defense theory. If you didn't take the violent action that you did, would it have gotten you or someone you love or someone that's on your team killed? And if the answer is yes, then your action is thereby justified, just generally speaking. We also advise people to go look at their state laws, look at their case law, um,
Mm-hmm.
and also explain to them what if laws don't matter at the point at which you're having to take this action. Look at Katrina. If you look at Hurricane Katrina,
Yep. Yep.
thousands of people died, and I would wager to say hundreds of them died by gunfire. And a lot of them were not looters. They were going out looking for food and things they needed, and they had guns with them
Yeah.
because other people doing that had guns. Cops
Yeah.
killed them. The military that was deployed down there killed them. Blackwater that was deployed down there killed them, and they killed each other. So there was no law. There was no rule. It was, hey, you got a gun, I'm going to kill you. And I think a lot of people died unnecessarily for that because they had zero contact, zero training, and under that
Mm-hmm.
martial law threat, anything went. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so
Like a real no truth but power scenario is always necessarily horrible.
yes,
Like
and
it,
that's what
when
I
you
try to
what
leave people with. Like, you don't have context for this, and you may never get it. So you have to have a preconceived idea of this is what I'm capable of, this is what I'm okay with, and this is why
Mhm.
I'm training.
Okay, that I mean that leaves that brings up a really good, I think, something we can close on. I want to, and I got to refresh it. I need to fish it back out of my mind because I lost it. I had it, and I was like, "Oh goodness," and then I lose it. But you were talking about Katrina. You're talking about the use of force.
Yeah,
You're
martial
talking
law.
and martial law and paying attention. And so I think there it is. In gun culture, I think one thing that I'm trying to be an optimist. I'm trying to be the optimist, right? We grew up with the age of the NRA. We grew up in the age of like, oh, they're coming to take our guns and Joe Biden and whatever, right? Like, are they? I think if you vote for the left at this point in time, you know that they're trying to take your guns, and if you're in denial of that, then I think that's an ethical question.
Ooh, yeah.
But but that's like, it doesn't matter, man. You can't go down that road and win. But rather, what is it like? What is something that you can do? And if you're looking at your life and your scenario and where you live, what you got to do? You got to know the local laws. Absolutely, ignorance is not an excuse for or
Mm.
breaking the law. And not only is it's ethically, like, ignorance is not an excuse for doing something that is evil, right? We teach children this. Well, just
Hmm.
because you didn't know better doesn't mean it was okay. There's what is it? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, or fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, kind of thing. There's phrases like that. But so another one thing you can look at is who are the DA? Well, who's the DA in your area? Because how many people vote how many people vote for their DA and pay attention to who's in their legal system? And the answer is very, very few, which has actually a really good outlook. Is that if you pay a little bit of attention, if you look at your city and you go, oh, this isn't working out, and then you look at who's the DA and you vote, you participate in that election, you can make a massive change that ripples through the country. And then you're also building your community at your local level because you're paying attention to who's within your field of control, and you're building into, like, I have influence here, and your circle of influence is almost always the same thing as your circle of responsibility. And so then you have, like, it gun as gun control, or gun not gun control, as gun culture continues to grow, that is one place we can invest in, is that,
Oh my gosh, yes.
like, pay
Be
attention to your
involved.
DAs, vote for DAs who are not pro Second Amendment but pro self defense, right?
Yes.
It's not just like, oh, I'm a Second Amendment advocate,
Hair
it's like,
likes
whatever, man.
guns. Yeah, okay. As many
Yeah,
Republicans have said that and then voted against it,
all right, two blasts, gotcha. But so
Good.
It's
Uh,
gonna come
that
back to
is
haunt me.
so poignant though, and I think that judges are as important as well. Baton Rouge
Hmm.
is rife with judges that let people go. It's known as revolving door here, and I
Yep.
don't want to take up the remaining time with stories, but the amount of people I've arrested for true violent crime. I mean, you know, rape and even murder that have gotten out, and within days or weeks on a low bond because the judge doesn't care or the judge is corrupt or whatever it is, and they go out and commit another murder or another rape,
Hmm.
and that person, that innocent victim who had violence of bad intent visited on them by an evil person that the system let go.
Hmm.
After good people, good cops do all the work that they're supposed to do. That's the story that doesn't get told.
Yep.
And you can change that by voting for a DA that's tough on crime and judges that are tough on crime and that are pro self defense and pro good people, private property, and pro freedom.
Hmm. Alrighty. Well, I think we're gonna wrap it up then, because that's like a really good start. Like, this is a really great conversation.
That's
So
good.
I'm gonna have to, like, I need a verbal commitment from you that at some point in time in the future you'll come back on the show.
Oh yeah, I really enjoy podcasts. I'm from the South. I like to talk, and
Oh
I
no.
really I really enjoy podcasts that have a point. I've listened to a lot of them where people just ramble about their background, um, and not even about a good story, but just about
Hmm.
who they are and what they like and the things they do. And this, I think, was a good conversation about stuff that actually matters, that influences the culture that we are in. So I appreciate being a part of it. I was really looking forward to it, and it did not disappoint.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. This is one of those things where, I think we as participants in gun culture on all levels have things on our chest that we want to talk about, but the can not it's like, whether it's the FUDs who condemned intellectualism, and we can get into like new FUDism next time, but whether it's the FUDs who condemn who like looked at anything intellectual with a suspect, or like the American culture writ large, which like, likes to throw the word domestic terrorism around a little bit too much. It can become uncomfortable and difficult because it's also an uncomfortable topic.
Hmm.
But if we engage in it honestly and we have that courage and humility, I think gun culture will go far. It'll and this is you're just giving me the encouragement I need for the day. So
Yeah,
thanks
same to
very
you,
much
man.
for
It's been
that.
awesome. Oh, it's
Well,
been great.
then so before I close out, where can people find you? Um, where Jared, where can people find you? Where can people how where can they, if they want to get into one of your classes, how do they do it? And if they have questions they want to field you that are honest and earnest questions, how can they reach out to you? Like, what's the best way?
Gotcha. So email is good because a steady place where it stays. I get about 100 direct messages a day on Instagram. You're welcome to reach out to me there. I will reply, but you might get lost in the sauce. So the Instagram is at Orion underscore training underscore group. I'm the one that runs that. You will be talking to me if you get on there. Same with the email. That is Orion Training Group LLC at gmail.com. If you want to sign up for a class or look at like our instructors' backgrounds, we're an open book. Our mission statement is right there on the front page. That is oriontraininggroup.com. Now, this confuses a lot of people, but again, we talked about background checking. It's a manual system. You have to copy and paste a form into your email. You fill the form out and you request membership or you request registration to the class you want. I have to go and manually check that information and read your little essay you wrote. And then if you're accepted, you receive an invoice. And once you pay the invoice, you're on the roster. So it's not just a click it and buy it, right? You can't just click membership and you pay the money and you're in the class. We have a little bit more of a process. And
Okay.
then last but not least, if you want to buy T-shirts, me and my brother draw. I love to draw. I'm an artist. We draw these T-shirts. We have a new one every month. This month's is Oscar the Grouch with a chalkboard, and it says one of yours in the hospital equals two of theirs in the morgue. So while we're on the topic of violence, I think that's going to be a pretty good shirt. It's going to sell well. So you go to orionconcepts.shop and you can buy the funny T-shirts that me and my brother draw. But
Awesome.
otherwise, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. For those of you still listening, this is the Redacted Culture podcast and conversation. We are currently, as you've noticed, we didn't put any ads in this because we are currently self-supported and self-funded. If you want to help out the project, you can reach out to us on Instagram at Redacted LLC. That's Instagram at Redacted LLC. And then if you're watching this on YouTube, you know where to find us there. And then the webpage is redactedllc.com. And there we have a merch page, stickers, patches, and if you can decipher the codes, you'll figure things out for yourself. So
They're really cool
we will
shirts too, guys. He showed me some at the class. They're awesome. You should buy them.